The sun was setting over the horizon, casting long shadows across the training grounds of New Haven. The air smelled of damp earth and freshly cut grass, a mix that reminded Daniel Carter of home. He stood in the middle of the field, his boots sinking slightly into the soft soil as he adjusted the strap of his rifle. Around him, other cadets from the Interstellar Defense Academy were packing up their gear after another long day of drills. Laughter and chatter filled the air, but Daniel stayed quiet, his focus unwavering. Emily Ross walked up to him, her blonde hair tied back in a loose ponytail. She had a habit of teasing him whenever she got the chance. "You know," she said, with a smirk, "most people would be heading back to the barracks by now. But not you, Daniel. You're always out here, like some kind of machine." Daniel glanced at her, but didn't respond right away. His dark brown eyes scanned the area one last time before he finally turned to face her. "If I want to get better, I need to practice," he said simply. His voice was calm, almost too calm for someone who had been running drills all day. Emily sighed, shaking her head. "Better? You're already top of our class. What more do you want?" He shrugged, avoiding her gaze. "It's not about being the best, it's about being ready." "Ready for what?" Emily asked, crossing her arms. "An alien invasion, a war. Come on, Daniel, you can't keep pushing yourself like this." Before he could answer, a sharp whistle cut through the air. Both of them turned to see Captain Lewis standing near the edge of the field, holding a small handheld device. His expression was grim, and the usual relaxed atmosphere among the cadets quickly evaporated. Something was wrong. "All cadets, report to Briefing Tent Delta immediately," Captain Lewis called out, his voice carrying authority. "This is not a drill." Daniel exchanged a quick look with Emily before they both hurried toward the tent. Inside, the mood was tense. Cadets sat on folding chairs or leaned against the walls, whispering nervously to each other. Captain Lewis stood at the front, his face illuminated by the glow of a holographic map projected onto the table. The map showed the layout of the colony, with a red dot blinking ominously near the outskirts. "We've received reports of an unidentified threat." Moving through the forest, Captain Lewis began without preamble. "Colonists have spotted what appears to be a Vraxian Ravager, a large, highly aggressive alien creature known for its destructive capabilities. So far, it has attacked 3 settlements, leaving behind significant casualties." A murmur rippled through the room. Everyone knew about the rat. Stories of its ferocity were legendary, passed down among soldiers and colonists alike. It was said to be nearly invincible, its thick armored hide resistant to most weapons. Even experienced fighters struggled to take it down. Captain Lewis raised a hand to silence the group. "Reinforcements are en route, but they won't arrive for at least 48 hours. In the meantime, we need volunteers to scout the area and assess the situation. Whoever goes will be putting themselves in extreme danger." No one spoke for a moment. The weight of the task hung heavy in the air. Then, Daniel stood up. "I'll go," he said firmly, his voice cutting through the silence. Captain Lewis frowned. "Cadet Carter, are you sure about this? This isn't a training exercise. If you encounter the Ravager, there's a good chance you won't come back." "I understand, sir," Daniel replied without hesitation. "But someone has to do it, and if we wait, more people could die." Emily shot to her feet. "If Daniel's going, then so am I." Captain Lewis looked between the two of them, clearly conflicted. Finally, he nodded. "Very well, you leave at first light. Prepare yourselves in, don't underestimate the Ravager." That night, Daniel lay awake in his bunk, staring at the ceiling. Sleep eluded him, as it often did when his mind was racing. Images of the Ravager flashed in his head, its razor-sharp claws, its glowing eyes, the destruction it left in its wake. He couldn't shake the feeling that this mission was bigger than just tracking a monster. It felt personal, though he wasn't sure why. Down the row of bunks, Emily tossed and turned, unable to sleep either. She sat up and looked over at Daniel. "You still awake?" she whispered. "Yeah," he replied quietly. She swung her legs over the side of her bunk and padded over to his. Sitting on the edge, she studied him for a moment. "You really think we can handle this?" "We have to," Daniel said. "There's no other choice." Emily hesitated, then reached into her pocket and pulled out a small photo. It was worn and creased, the edges frayed from years of handling. "This is my little brother, Jake," she said, showing it to him. "He's only 10. When Mom signed us up for relocation to New Haven, she thought it'd be safer here." Now her voice trailed off, and she tucked the photo back into her pocket. "I guess what I'm trying to say is, I'm scared, but I'm also glad I'm doing this with you." Daniel nodded slowly. "We'll watch each other's backs. That's what partners do." At dawn, the 2 cadets gathered their gear and set out toward the forest. The sky was painted in shades of orange and pink, the morning mist clinging to the trees. As they stepped off the beaten path, the world around them grew quieter, the sounds of the colony fading into the distance. The forest was dense, its towering trees blocking out much of the sunlight. Shadows danced across the ground, and the air carried the faint scent of moss and decay. "This place gives me the creeps," Emily muttered, glancing around nervously. She held her rifle close, her finger resting lightly on the trigger. Feels like something's watching us. Daniel didn't respond. He moved silently, his footsteps barely making a sound as he scanned the surroundings. His senses were on high alert, every rustle of leaves or snap of a twig causing him to pause. He knew the Ravager could be anywhere, lurking just out of sight. Hours passed, and the deeper they ventured into the forest, the darker it became. The temperature dropped, and a chill settled over them. Emily shivered, pulling her jacket tighter around herself. "How much farther do you think we should go?" she asked. "As far as we need to," Daniel replied. "We can't afford to turn back empty-handed." By midday, they found the first signs of the Ravager's presence, a trail of destruction that cut through the forest like a scar. Trees were uprooted, their trunks splintered and broken. The ground was littered with claw marks and patches of scorched earth. It was clear the creature had been here recently. "This thing doesn't mess around," Emily said, her voice tinged with awe and fear. She knelt down to examine a massive footprint embedded in the mud. "Look at the size of this thing. How are we supposed to fight it?" "We don't," Daniel said. "Not yet. First we find where it's hiding. Then we figure out how to stop it." As the hours dragged on, fatigue began to creep in. Emily stumbled once, catching herself on a tree trunk. "Maybe we should take a break," she suggested. "Just for a few minutes." "No," Daniel said sharply. "We can't afford to stop." Emily stared at him, frustration flashing in her eyes. "You haven't slept in days, Daniel. You're going to collapse if you keep going like this." "I'll be fine," he insisted, though his voice betrayed a hint of wariness. "We can rest later." Reluctantly, Emily followed him, knowing there was no point in arguing. They pressed on, their pace slowing as the day wore on. By the time night fell, the forest was pitch black, the only light coming from the small flashlight Daniel carried. Exhaustion weighed heavily on both of them, but Daniel refused to give in. Somewhere in the darkness, the Ravager stirred. Its low growl echoed through the trees, sending a shiver down Emily's spine. She gripped her rifle tightly, her heart pounding in her chest. "Do you hear that?" she whispered. Daniel nodded, his jaw clenched. "Stay close." They moved cautiously, their breaths shallow as they tried to pinpoint the source of the sound. Suddenly, a deafening roar shattered the silence, reverberating through the forest. The ground trembled beneath their feet, and the trees swayed violently. "It's here," Emily breathed, her voice barely audible. Daniel tightened his grip on his dagger, the cold metal reassuring in his hand. "Get ready," he said, his voice steady despite the chaos around them. In the distance, glowing eyes pierced through the darkness. Locking onto them, the Ravager emerged from the shadows, its massive form looming over them like a nightmare brought to life. And so, the real challenge began. The Ravager's roar echoed through the forest, shaking the ground beneath Daniel and Emily's feet. Its massive form loomed in the darkness, its glowing eyes fixed on them like twin moons. The creature was even larger than they had imagined. Its armored hide glistened faintly in the dim light, and its claws looked sharp enough to tear through steel. For a moment, both cadets froze, their breaths caught in their throats. Emily was the first to react. She raised her rifle and fired a shot, the sound of the blast ringing out like thunder. The bullet struck the Ravager's chest, but ricocheted off harmlessly, leaving no visible mark. The beast let out another deafening roar, this time angrier, and took a step forward, its claws scraping against the ground. "Run," Daniel shouted, grabbing Emily's arm and pulling her back. They sprinted into the dense underbrush, dodging trees and leaping over roots as the Ravager crashed after them. Its heavy footsteps shook the earth, and its growls filled the air, making it hard to think clearly. They didn't stop until they reached a small clearing, gasping for breath. Emily leaned against a tree, clutching her side. "That thing is insane," she panted. "What are we supposed to do? It's like nothing can hurt it." Daniel didn't answer right away. He was scanning the area, his mind racing. His dagger felt weightless in his hand, almost useless against such a monster, but he couldn't afford to give up. Not now, not when so many lives depended on them. "We need to lead it away from the colony," he said finally, his voice steady. "Despite the chaos around them, if it gets closer to the settlements, more people will die." "And then what?" Emily asked, her voice rising in frustration. "You think we can just lure it into some trap? We don't have anything to fight it with." "I don't know yet," Daniel admitted, "but we'll figure something out." Before Emily could respond, the Ravager burst into the clearing, its massive body blocking out the moonlight. It lunged at them, its claws swiping through the air. Daniel grabbed Emily and pulled her out of the way just in time, the force of the attack sending them tumbling to the ground. Emily scrambled to her feet, firing her rifle again, but the bullets had no effect. The Ravager roared in fury, advancing toward them with terrifying speed. "Keep moving," Daniel yelled, pushing Emily ahead of him. They ran deeper into the forest, the Ravager close behind. Every step felt heavier than the last, exhaustion creeping into their muscles. Daniel's legs burned, and his vision blurred, but he forced himself to keep going. He couldn't stop, not now. By the third night, Daniel hadn't slept at all. His body screamed for rest, but his mind refused to let him give in. Emily noticed how pale and drawn he looked, the dark circles under his eyes making him seem older than he was. She tried to convince him to take a break, but he shook his head stubbornly. "There's no time," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "We have to keep moving." Emily wanted to argue, but she knew it wouldn't do any good. Instead, she focused on keeping watch while Daniel rested briefly against a tree. Even then, he didn't fully relax, his hand gripping the dagger tightly as if expecting the Ravager to appear at any moment. As the hours dragged on, the forest grew quieter, the usual sounds of nocturnal creatures replaced by an eerie stillness. The Ravager's presence seemed to have driven everything else away, leaving only fear in its wake. Emily shivered, wrapping her arms around herself to ward off the cold. She glanced at Daniel, who was staring into the distance, lost in thought. "You're crazy. You know that," she said softly, trying to lighten the mood. "No one else would push themselves like this." Daniel gave her a small, tired smile. "Maybe, but we're here now, and we're not leaving until this is over." Emily sighed, shaking her head. "You're impossible." On the 7th day, they finally found what they were looking for, the Ravager's lair. It was a cavern hidden deep within the forest, its entrance littered with bones and scraps of metal. The stench of decay was overwhelming, making it hard to breathe. Daniel and Emily crouched behind a fallen tree, watching as the Ravager emerged from the shadows. It moved slowly, almost lazily, as if it knew it had nothing to fear. "This is it," Daniel whispered, his voice low and steady. "We make our move now." Emily nodded, though her hands trembled as she gripped her rifle. "What's the plan?" "We separate it from the cave," Daniel said. "It's too dangerous to fight it here. If we can draw it out into the open, maybe we'll have a better chance." "And if that doesn't work?" Emily asked, her voice barely audible. Daniel hesitated, then shrugged. "Then we improvise." Without waiting for a response, he stood up and stepped into the clearing, waving his arms to get the Ravager's attention. "Hey, over here!" he shouted, his voice echoing through the forest. The Ravager turned its head, its glowing eyes locking onto him. For a moment, it seemed frozen, as if unsure whether to attack. Then, with a guttural roar, it charged, moving faster than either of them expected. Emily watched in horror as Daniel sprinted away, the Ravager hot on his heels. She followed at a safe distance, firing her rifle whenever she got a clear shot. The bullets continued to bounce off the creature's armor, but the noise distracted it momentarily, giving Daniel precious seconds to gain ground. He led the Ravager deeper into the forest, weaving between trees and ducking under branches. His movements were precise, calculated, even as exhaustion threatened to overwhelm him. Finally, they reached a wide-open field bathed in moonlight. The Ravager skidded to a halt, its massive body casting a long shadow across the ground. It turned to face Daniel, its eyes narrowed as if sizing him up. For a moment, neither of them moved, the tension between them palpable. Daniel tightened, his grip on the dagger, his knuckles white, his heart pounded in his chest, but his mind remained clear. He studied the Ravager carefully, searching for any sign of weakness. Then, he saw a small gap beneath its jaw, where its armor didn't quite meet. It was tiny, barely noticeable, but it was there. "Emily," he called out, his voice calm despite the adrenaline coursing through him. "I need your help." Emily stepped out from behind a tree, her rifle aimed at the Ravager. "What do you want me to do?" "Distract it," Daniel said. "Keep it focused on you while I get close." "Are you insane?" Emily hissed, her eyes wide. "You'll never make it." "I have to try," Daniel replied. "Just trust me." Emily hesitated, then nodded. Taking a deep breath, she fired a shot at the Ravager's head, the bullet striking its armored hide with a metallic clang. The creature roared in anger, turning its attention to her. Daniel used the distraction to circle around behind it. Staying low to avoid detection, the Ravager lunged at Emily, its claws slicing through the air. She rolled out of the way just in time, firing another shot to keep it occupied. Meanwhile, Daniel crept closer, his every movement deliberate. His heart raced, but he pushed the fear aside, focusing only on the task ahead. When he was close enough, he made his move. Sprinting forward, he leaped onto the Ravager's back, clinging to its ridged spine with one hand while holding the dagger in the other. The creature thrashed wildly, trying to throw him off, but Daniel held on with all his strength. Emily watched, in terror, shouting encouragement as the Ravager bucked and roared, summoning every ounce of courage. Daniel drove the dagger into the gap beneath the Ravager's jaw. The blade sank deep, and the creature let out a deafening scream before collapsing to the ground, lifeless. Daniel fell to his knees beside it, breathing heavily, his body trembling with exhaustion. Emily rushed to his side, tears streaming down her face. "You did it," she said, her voice choked with emotion. "You actually did it." Daniel nodded weakly, unable to speak. For 8 days, he had pushed himself to the brink of collapse, and now, against all odds, he had succeeded. As the first rays of sunlight broke through the trees, he allowed himself to close his eyes, finally letting the weight of everything catch up to him. For the first time in what felt like forever, he could rest. The morning sun filtered through the trees, casting golden light over the battlefield. The Ravager lay motionless on the ground, its massive body sprawled across the field like a fallen monument. Daniel sat nearby, his back against a tree, his chest rising and falling with labored breaths. His dagger lay beside him, its blade still stained with the creature's dark blood. Emily knelt next to him, her hands trembling as she checked his injuries. "You're hurt," she said softly, pointing to a deep gash on his arm where one of the Ravager's claws had grazed him. "We need to clean that before it gets infected." "It's fine," Daniel muttered, though his voice was weak. He winced as he tried to move, every muscle in his body screaming in protest. "Just give me a minute." Emily shook her head, tears still glistening in her eyes. "You don't get to brush this off, Daniel. You've been running on nothing. For days you just killed a monster most people wouldn't dare face. You deserve more than a minute." Daniel didn't respond. Instead, he closed his eyes, letting the warmth of the sun wash over him. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, he allowed himself to feel the weight of everything, the exhaustion, the pain, the fear. But beneath it all was a strange sense of relief, a quiet satisfaction that he had done what needed to be done. Emily rummaged through their supplies, pulling out a small first aid kit. She cleaned the wound carefully, her hands steadier now that the immediate danger had passed. As she worked, she couldn't help but glance at the Ravager's lifeless form. It was hard to believe that something so terrifying could now lie so still. "I never thought we'd make it," she admitted, breaking the silence. "I mean, I knew you were strong, but this was insane." Daniel opened his eyes and looked at her. "We didn't have a choice. If we hadn't stopped it, it would have kept attacking the colony." "I know," Emily said, her voice softening. "But that doesn't make it any less crazy. You pushed yourself to the edge." "Daniel, what if you hadn't made it?" He shrugged, wincing as the movement pulled at his injured arm. "Then someone else would have had to finish the job. Either way, the Ravager wasn't going to win." Emily sighed, shaking her head. "You're impossible. You know that, completely impossible." Despite her frustration, there was admiration in her tone. Daniel had always been different, quiet, determined, almost unnervingly focused. But now, after everything they had been through, she understood him a little better. He wasn't just driven by duty or pride. He genuinely believed in protecting others, no matter the cost. After resting for a while, they began the long journey back to the colony. The walk was slow and difficult, especially for Daniel, whose body was still recovering from the strain of the past week. Emily stayed close, helping him whenever he stumbled and keeping a watchful eye for any signs of trouble. The forest seemed eerily quiet now, as if holding its breath after the chaos of the Ravager's rampage. As they walked, Emily couldn't stop thinking about what they had accomplished. Killing the Ravager wasn't just about survival, it was proof that even ordinary people could do extraordinary things when they had to. She glanced at Daniel, who was limping but still moving forward with quiet determination. "You realize everyone's going to call you a hero when we get back, right?" she said, trying to lighten the mood. Daniel gave her a tired smile. "I'm not a hero, I just did what needed to be done." "Yeah, well, try telling that to the colonists," Emily replied. "They're going to throw a parade for you, or something." Daniel chuckled weakly. "Let's hope not. I don't think I can handle a parade right now." Emily grinned, glad to see even a hint of humor in him. "Fair enough. But you should be ready for some attention. People are going to want to hear your story." Daniel didn't respond. He wasn't interested in fame or recognition. All he cared about was making sure the colony was safe. Still, he knew Emily was right. Their victory would mean something. To the settlers, a reminder that even in the face of overwhelming odds, hope wasn't lost. When they finally reached the outskirts of the colony, they were greeted by a group of anxious colonists. News of the Ravager's defeat had spread quickly, and many had gathered to welcome them back. Captain Lewis was among them, his expression a mix of relief and disbelief. "You did it," he said, approaching Daniel and Emily. His voice was filled with awe. "You actually did it." "We had to," Daniel replied simply, leaning heavily on Emily for support. "There was no other option." Captain Lewis nodded, clearly moved. "You've saved countless lives today. Both of you." He turned to address the crowd. "These two cadets risked everything to protect us. They faced a creature that most soldiers wouldn't dare challenge, and they won." The colonists erupted into cheers, clapping and shouting their gratitude. Daniel shifted uncomfortably, unused to being the center of attention. Emily, however, soaked it in, smiling broadly as she waved to the crowd. Later that evening, Daniel and Emily were invited to a small gathering at the colony's main hall. Food and drinks were laid out, and people lined up to thank them personally. Some shared stories of loved ones who had been saved because of their bravery. Others simply shook their hands, too emotional to speak. Daniel listened quietly, nodding. Along as people spoke, he appreciated their gratitude, but he couldn't shake the feeling that he didn't deserve all the praise. He had acted out of necessity, not heroism. Still, seeing the smiles on their faces reminded him why he had pushed himself so hard. Emily, on the other hand, thrived in the spotlight. She laughed and joked with the colonists, recounting parts of their journey in a way that made it sound like an epic adventure. When someone asked how Daniel had managed to kill the Ravager, she didn't hesitate to embellish the story, describing his final strike as if it were something out of a legend. He jumped onto the beast's back and drove the dagger straight into its heart, she said dramatically, earning gasps and applause from the crowd. It was incredible. Daniel rolled his eyes but didn't correct her. Let them think what they wanted. As long as the colony was safe, he didn't care how the story was told. That night, after the celebrations had died down, Daniel found himself alone on the edge of the settlement. He sat on a small hill overlooking the colony, watching as the lights twinkled in the distance. The cool night air helped clear his mind, and for the first time in days, he felt truly at peace. Emily joined him a few minutes later, carrying 2 cups of hot tea. She handed one to him before sitting down beside him. "Couldn't sleep?" she asked. "No," Daniel replied, taking a sip of the tea. "Too much noise in my head." Emily nodded, staring out at the horizon. "Do you ever wonder what comes next?" "After all this, all the time," Daniel admitted. "But for now, I'm just glad we made it through." Emily smiled, leaning back on her hands. "You know, I used to think I was signing up for something simple when I joined the academy. Learn some skills, maybe see a bit of action. But this," she gestured toward the colony, "this is something else entirely." Daniel glanced at her, surprised by the seriousness in her voice. "Are you saying you regret it?" "No," Emily said quickly. "Not at all. I guess I'm just realizing how big this is, how much responsibility we have, not just to ourselves, but to everyone else." Daniel nodded slowly, understanding exactly what she meant. Being a cadet wasn't just about training or fighting, it was about stepping up when no one else could. It was about making sacrifices, even when it hurt. They sat in silence for a while, watching the stars twinkle above them. Despite everything they had been through, there was a sense of calm in the air, a quiet reassurance that they had done the right thing. "You know," Emily said after a while, breaking the silence, "you might not think of yourself as a hero, but you are to me." Daniel looked at her, surprised by the sincerity in her voice. Before he could respond, she stood up, brushing dirt off her pants. "Come on," she said with a grin, "let's get some rest. Tomorrow's a new day." As they headed back toward the barracks, Daniel felt a flicker of hope. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, but for now, they had earned a moment of peace, and sometimes, that was enough. The days following the defeat of the Ravager passed in a blur for Daniel and Emily. Life in the colony slowly returned to normal, though the scars of the attack remained visible. Trees were still uprooted, buildings bore claw marks, and some settlers avoided venturing too far into the forest, fearing what else might be lurking there. But despite the lingering fear, there was also a newfound sense of hope, a belief that even the most terrifying threats could be overcome. Daniel spent most of his time recovering from his injuries. His arm healed slowly, the gash leaving behind a jagged scar that he would carry for the rest of his life. The physical wounds were painful, but the mental toll was harder to shake. He found himself replaying the fight over and over in his mind, analyzing every move, every decision. Had he been reckless, could he have done something differently? These questions haunted him, even as others praised him for his bravery. Emily tried to keep his spirits up, visiting him whenever she had free time. She brought books, snacks, and sometimes just sat with him, talking about anything and everything except the Ravager. "You need to stop thinking so much," she told him one afternoon, handing him a cup of tea. "You saved us all, Daniel. That's enough." "It doesn't feel like enough," he admitted quietly, staring at the steam rising from the cup. "What if it happens again? What if next time, I'm not fast enough or strong enough?" Emily sighed, sitting down beside him. "You can't think like that. No one expects you to be perfect. All anyone asks is that you try your best, and you did more than that." Her words helped, but they didn't completely erase his doubts. Still, he appreciated her presence. Having someone who understood what he had been through made the burden easier to bear. A few days later, Captain Lewis called them both into his office. The room was small and sparsely decorated, with maps and charts covering the walls. Lewis stood behind his desk, his expression serious but kind. "I wanted to thank you both personally," he began, gesturing for them to sit. "What you did out there, it's not something we'll forget anytime soon." "We were just doing our job, sir," Daniel said, shifting uncomfortably in his chair. Formal praise always made him uneasy. Lewis nodded. "Maybe so, but not everyone would have stepped up like you did. You showed incredible courage and skill." He paused, leaning forward slightly. "That's why I've decided to recommend both of you for early promotion." Emily's eyes widened in surprise. "Promotion, sir?" "Yes," Lewis confirmed. "Given your performance during this mission, it's clear you're ready for greater responsibilities. Of course, the final decision will come from command, but I don't expect any issues." Daniel glanced at Emily, who looked like she might burst with excitement. He felt a flicker of pride but quickly pushed it aside. Promotions meant more challenges, more pressure, and, after everything they'd been through, Part of him wasn't sure he was ready for that. "Thank you, sir," he said finally, keeping his tone neutral. "We appreciate the recognition." Lewis studied him for a moment, then nodded. "Take some time to think about it. This isn't something you need to decide right away." After leaving the office, Emily practically bounced with energy. "Can you believe it?" she exclaimed. "Early promotion. People train for years to get where we are now, and here we are, skipping ahead." Daniel smiled faintly. "Don't get too excited yet. We still have to wait for Command's approval." "Oh, come on," Emily teased. "Even you have to admit this is exciting." Admitted Tor happy. He hesitated, then shrugged. "It's nice, I guess, but promotions won't change anything. There will still be missions, dangers, monsters waiting to attack." Emily's smile faded slightly. "You're thinking about the Ravager again, aren't you?" "Not really," Daniel lied. Truthfully, the memory of the creature lingered in his mind like a shadow. He knew it wasn't healthy to dwell on it, but he couldn't help wondering what other horrors might exist beyond the stars. As the days turned into weeks, Daniel threw himself back into training. He pushed himself harder than ever, determined to prepare for whatever came next. Emily joined him often, though she struggled to match his intensity. "You're going to burn yourself out," she warned one evening as they sparred in the training yard. "You need to take breaks." "Daniel, I'm fine," he insisted, blocking her strike with practiced ease. "Besides, if I slack off, how am I supposed to handle the next mission?" "There won't always be a next mission," Emily countered, lowering her weapon. "Sometimes, you just need to live in the moment." Daniel frowned, stepping back. "And what if living in the moment means ignoring the danger? What if it means letting someone else die because I wasn't ready?" Emily opened her mouth to respond, then closed it again. She knew better than to argue when he got like this stubborn and unyielding. Instead, she changed tactics. "Fine, keep pushing yourself, but don't forget to take care of yourself. Okay, you're no good to anyone if you collapse." He nodded reluctantly, though he didn't fully agree. Taking care of himself had never been a priority, not when there were bigger things at stake. One evening, while walking through the colony, Daniel stumbled upon a group of children playing near the edge of the forest. They were laughing and chasing each other, their joy infectious. For a moment, he stopped to watch, feeling a pang of nostalgia. He remembered being their age, running around without a care in the world, dreaming of adventures among the stars. One of the boys noticed him and ran over, his face lighting up with excitement. "Are you the guy who killed the big monster?" he asked, his voice filled with awe. Daniel hesitated, unsure how to respond. Before he could answer, the boy continued, "My mom says you're a hero. Is it true?" "I just did what I had to do," Daniel replied, crouching down to meet the boy's gaze. Anyone else would have done the same. The boy shook his head vigorously. "No way. You're the bravest person I've ever heard of." Daniel chuckled softly, ruffling the boy's hair. "Thanks. Just promise me one thing, okay?" "What?" the boy asked eagerly. "Stay safe. Don't wander too close to the forest, and always listen to your parents." The boy nodded solemnly, as if taking an oath. "I promise." As Daniel walked away, he felt a strange warmth in his chest. For the first time, he allowed himself to accept the idea that maybe, just maybe, he had done something worth celebrating. It wasn't about fame or recognition. It was about making a difference, however small. Later that night, as he lay in bed staring at the ceiling, Daniel thought about the future. The galaxy was vast and full of unknown dangers, but it was also full of possibilities. Somewhere out there were new worlds to explore, new challenges to face, and new lives to protect. He didn't know what lay ahead, but he was ready to meet it head-on beside him. Emily slept soundly, her rhythmic breathing a comforting presence. Knowing she was there made everything seem a little less daunting. Together, they had faced the impossible, and together, they could face whatever came next. Tomorrow would bring its own battles, its own struggles. But for now, Daniel let himself rest, allowing the quiet certainty of the present to soothe his restless mind. Whatever happened, he knew one thing for sure: he wouldn't face it alone. The weeks turned into months, and life in the colony settled into a rhythm. The scars left by the Ravager's rampage began to fade as settlers worked together to rebuild what had been destroyed. Trees were replanted, buildings repaired, and fences reinforced. To outsiders, it might have seemed like nothing had changed, but for those who lived there, the memory of the attack lingered, a reminder of how fragile their peace truly was. For Daniel and Emily, things felt different. They had returned to their training routines, but neither of them could shake the sense that they were no longer ordinary cadets. Their promotion recommendations had been approved, and they now held positions of greater responsibility within the academy. With that came higher expectations and harder decisions. Daniel struggled with the weight of his new role. He had always pushed himself to be better, faster, stronger, but now he felt the pressure to lead others. Cadets looked up to him, seeking guidance and advice. Some even called him a hero, though he still cringed at the word. "I'm not special," he told Emily one evening as they walked along the edge of the forest. "I just did what anyone else would have done." Emily rolled her eyes, leaning on the railing of a small bridge that crossed a narrow stream. Stop being so modest, you saved lives, Daniel. That makes you special, whether you like it or not. It doesn't feel special, he admitted, staring at the water below. It feels heavy, like I'm carrying something I didn't ask for. Emily tilted her head, studying him carefully. You think too much. Sometimes, you just need to let yourself feel proud of what you've done. Daniel sighed, running a hand through his hair. Maybe, but pride won't stop the next threat or prepare us for it. Emily didn't argue. She knew Daniel well enough to understand that his doubts weren't something she could fix with words. All she could do was stand by him, offering support when he needed it most. One morning, Captain Lewis called them into his office again. This time, his expression was grim. Papers and maps covered his desk, and a holographic display hovered in the air, showing a distant star system. We've received reports from a nearby colony, he began, his voice low. Another threat has emerged, this time, farther away. What kind of threat? Emily asked, leaning forward slightly. Lewis hesitated before answering. A new species of alien predators. We don't know much about them yet, but they're highly aggressive and seem to target settlements near resource-rich areas. Daniel frowned. How is this our problem? Shouldn't reinforcements handle it? Normally, yes, Lewis replied. But these creatures are spreading quickly, and we can't afford to wait. Command wants experienced personnel on site to assess the situation, and you two are the best candidates. Emily glanced at Daniel, sensing his hesitation. Are you sure we're ready for this? She asked. We barely survived the last mission. You're more prepared than most, Lewis said firmly. Besides, this isn't about fighting, about gathering information. If we can learn more about these creatures, we'll have a better chance of stopping them before they cause real damage. Daniel nodded slowly, though his stomach churned with unease. He trusted Lewis, but the thought of facing another unknown danger filled him with dread. Still, he couldn't ignore the importance of the mission. When do we leave? He asked. As soon as possible, Lewis replied. Preparations are already underway. The journey to the affected colony took several days. They traveled aboard a small transport ship, its cramped quarters offering little room to move around. Emily spent most of the trip reading mission briefs and reviewing tactical strategies, while Daniel stared out the window, lost in thought. The stars stretched endlessly beyond the glass. Beautiful, but cold, a reminder of how vast and indifferent the universe could be. When they arrived, the colony greeted them with cautious optimism. Its people were wary but hopeful, clinging to the belief that help had finally come. Daniel and Emily wasted no time getting to work. They met with local leaders, examined damaged structures, and interviewed survivors. Each story painted a chilling picture of the predators, fast, intelligent, and relentless. They hunt in packs. One settler explained, his voice trembling. They come at night, moving silently until it's too late. We tried to fight back, but our weapons barely scratched them. Daniel exchanged a glance with Emily. The situation sounded eerily familiar. Do you know where they come from? He asked. The settler shook his head. No one knows. One day they were here, and the next, chaos. As they gathered more information, Daniel and Emily ventured into the wilderness surrounding the colony. Armed with advanced scanning equipment, they searched for signs of the predator's lair. The forest was dense and unfamiliar, its towering trees casting long shadows that made navigation difficult. Every rustle of leaves or snap of a twig set their nerves on edge. On the third day of their search, they found what they were looking for. Series of tunnels carved into the earth, hidden beneath thick underbrush. The entrance was partially obscured by fallen branches, but the faint scent of decay gave it away. This is it, Emily whispered, her voice barely audible. Their nest. Daniel nodded, tightening his grip on his weapon. Let's move carefully. We don't know what's waiting inside. They crept forward, their movements slow and deliberate. The tunnels twisted and turned, leading deeper underground. The air grew colder, and the walls were slick with moisture. Strange markings etched into the stone hinted at the intelligence of the creatures. They weren't mindless beasts, but hunters with purpose. Suddenly, a low growl echoed through the tunnel. Daniel froze, signaling for Emily to stay close. Ahead of them, glowing eyes appeared in the darkness, followed by the sound of claws scraping against stone. The predators emerged one by one, their sleek bodies glistening in the dim light. They were smaller than the Ravager, but their speed and agility made them equally dangerous. Back up slowly, Daniel murmured, keeping his weapon trained on the nearest creature. Don't make any sudden moves. Emily obeyed, her heart pounding in her chest. The predators circled them, sizing them up like wolves stalking prey. For a moment, it seemed they might retreat, but then, without warning, one of them lunged. Daniel fired his weapon, the blast striking the creature squarely in the chest. It yelped and stumbled, giving them a chance to break free. Run, he shouted, grabbing Emily's arm and pulling her toward the exit. They sprinted through the tunnels, the predators hot on their heels. The narrow passages forced them to duck and weave, their breaths coming in ragged gasps. Just as they reached the surface, Daniel tripped over a route, falling hard onto the ground. Emily turned back, grabbing his hand and hauling him to his feet. "We're not dying here," she said fiercely, her voice cutting through his exhaustion. "Not today." With renewed determination, they bolted toward the colony. The predators, fading into the distance behind them when they finally collapsed at the edge of the settlement, gasping for air. They knew they had narrowly escaped disaster. That night, as they reviewed their findings, Daniel and Emily agreed on one thing. The predators were unlike anything humanity had faced before. Their intelligence, adaptability, and hunting tactics made them a formidable foe. But they also realized something else. They weren't invincible. With careful planning and teamwork, they could be stopped. The next morning, Daniel stood before the colony's leaders, presenting their report. "These creatures are dangerous," he said, his voice steady, "but they're not unbeatable. If we act quickly and coordinate our efforts, we can drive them back." The settlers listened intently, their faces reflecting a mix of fear and hope. By the end of the meeting, they had devised a combination of traps, patrols, and defensive measures designed to protect the colony while driving the predators away. As Daniel and Emily prepared to leave, the settlers gathered to thank them. "You've given us a fighting chance," one woman said, tears in her eyes. "Thank you." Daniel nodded, feeling a flicker of pride despite his usual reluctance. "We'll keep working to make sure you're safe," he promised. On the journey home, Emily leaned back in her seat, closing her eyes. "You know," she said after a while, "we've come a long way since that first mission." Daniel smiled faintly, staring out the window. "Yeah, and there's still a lot more to do." Emily opened one eye, grinning. "Always the optimist, aren't you?" He chuckled softly. "Someone has to be." As the ship soared through the stars, Daniel allowed himself a rare moment of reflection. The galaxy was vast and full of dangers, but it was also full of people willing to stand together and face those dangers head-on. Together, they had proven that even the smallest acts of courage could change the course of history. And for the first time, Daniel felt ready not just to survive, but to thrive. Whatever challenges lay ahead, he knew he wouldn't face them alone.